In the quiet, frozen woods, where memories linger like the scent of pine, an old man finds a bird, fragile, broken, and far from home. But in saving her, he discovers a kind of music that heals the silence of his heart. And when the songbird's last note fades, the world learns that some bonds, born of love and loss, are never truly broken. They simply turn into something that echoes through the years, long after the last breath is drawn. The forest had long since learned to speak in silence. Winter wrapped the trees in thick layers of snow, and the wind, sharp and biting, howled through the bare branches like a forgotten prayer. The world beyond Elias's cabin felt distant, as though it existed only in memory. The woods were a place of quiet solitude, where the only sounds were the crunch of snow beneath his boots and the occasional crack of a branch breaking under the weight of winter. Elias had grown used to this stillness. It was the kind of quiet that seeped deep into the bones, the kind that spoke of time slowing down, of days blending together into one long cold shadow. His days were spent inside his creaky cabin, tucked away from the world, surrounded by shelves of books and old photographs that told stories of a life once full of warmth. His wife, Clara, had been the heartbeat of this place. It was her laughter that had once filled the space between the walls, her gentle humming as she worked that had made this cabin feel alive. But Clara was gone now, taken by a sickness that no doctor could cure, no prayer could heal. She had slipped away quietly, just like the changing seasons, leaving behind only the remnants of a life they had shared. Elias never talked much about her anymore. His grief had taken on a weight that words could no longer lift. So he kept to himself, finding solace in the things Clara had left behind. The scent of lavender that still lingered in the blankets, the old teacups she had used every morning, the books they had read together. Every day, Elias wandered through these remnants of their life, and every day the silence pressed harder on him. But on this particular morning something was different. Elias had stepped out of the cabin to gather firewood, the air colder than usual, the wind biting at his skin. As he bent down to pick up a fallen branch, his eyes caught a movement, a small, fragile creature lying in the snow. He froze. It was a bird, no bigger than his hand, its feathers fluffed up against the cold, its little body trembling. Elias's heart caught in his throat. The bird looked so fragile, so lost, far from its migration path, too weak to fly, caught in the unforgiving cold. It wasn't much more than a speck of life against the vast, white wilderness. Without thinking, Elias bent down, gently scooping the bird into his hands. Its tiny body fit perfectly in his palms, and for a moment, it felt like he was holding something that still had the possibility of life, something that could be saved. "I won't let the cold take you," he murmured as if speaking to himself more than the bird. As he carried it inside, the warmth of the cabin enveloped them both, and Elias's once silent heart beat a little faster. Maybe, just maybe, this little creature could fill the empty spaces that had grown so wide. The bird was small, too small really, but its will to live was fierce. Elias had placed it near the fire, its tiny body quivering from the cold. He set a shallow bowl of warm milk beside it, hoping the warmth would coax it back to life. 4 hours he watched, his breath steadying with each little movement the bird made. It wasn't until the following morning that the bird opened its eyes fully. Its tiny beak twitched and then, almost imperceptibly, it chirped, soft and hoarse, like a voice that hadn't spoken in too long. Elias smiled faintly, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years, hope. The bird grew stronger with each passing day. Elias fed it pieces of bread soaked in milk, gently encouraging it to eat. Sometimes he'd sing to it, words that felt strange on his tongue but somehow right. Songs he had once sung to Clara, when her laugh was his morning sun. And though he hadn't realized it, singing these old tunes brought a warmth to the cabin that no fire could provide. One evening, as the light dimmed and the first stars blinked into existence, Elias sat by the hearth, his book forgotten in his lap. The bird, now stronger, perched on the arm of his chair, eyeing him curiously. Elias hadn't noticed how much time had passed, how the quiet had deepened between them. He felt the pull of the bird's gaze, a connection that went deeper than words. And then, without warning, the bird began to sing. At first, it was a single, trembling note. But then, as though coaxed by the firelight and the quiet stillness of the cabin, the song grew. It was low like a hum, but it carried something Elias couldn't explain. A sadness, a joy, a yearning all rolled into one. He sat, frozen, listening. The melody wrapped itself around him, seeping into his bones. The bird's voice was nothing like any bird song he'd ever heard. It was human, almost. It didn't just fill the space. It made the space come alive, breathing life into the old cabin. Elias's heart fluttered in his chest. He hadn't realized how empty he had felt until this moment, how hollow the silence had become in the years since Clara's death. And now here was this creature, this fragile, broken thing, filling the emptiness with a song so beautiful, so haunting, it felt like a prayer. The bird paused for a moment, its head tilted slightly as though waiting for something. And for the first time in a long time, Elias spoke, though his voice was thick with emotion. "What is your name?" he asked. The bird didn't answer, of course. But in the stillness of the room, Elias swore he heard the answer in his heart. Nor. What? He had never felt more certain of anything in his life. The days passed in a quiet rhythm, each one blending into the next as winter stretched its long frozen fingers across the forest. Elias had come to rely on Nor's songs, their haunting melodies filling the silence that had once swallowed him whole. It was as though the bird's voice was the bridge between his past and the present, a reminder that even in the coldest, most desolate places, life could still find a way to hum its tune. Nor had settled into a new routine. Each morning, she perched by the window as the light began to filter through the trees, her dark eyes fixed on the world outside. Sometimes, Elias would find her sitting at the base of the stove, her tiny feathers warmed by the crackling fire. Other times, she would hop onto his shoulder as he read, resting her tiny head against his cheek as though listening too. The villagers below the hill started to notice the music. It wasn't just a song, it was her song. Some said it was the sound of the forest itself speaking. Others whispered it was a spirit of the woods that had taken flight. Children would come up the path in groups, curious and wide-eyed, hoping to hear the songbird's voice. They would stand just outside the cabin, listening in awe to the notes that echoed softly into the morning air. Elias never spoke much to the villagers. He had always been a man of solitude, preferring the quiet company of books to the noise of small-town chatter. But as Nor's song filled the air, something inside him stirred, a memory of connection he had long buried. He found himself watching the children with a tenderness he hadn't realized he still possessed, his heart swelling with a bittersweet longing. Nor seemed to understand. Every evening after the children had left and the village had settled back into its quiet rhythm, the bird would fly to the highest perch in the cabin, her tiny body silhouetted against the dimming sky. And then, as if compelled by the pull of some unseen force, she would sing. The song would rise, slow at first like the dawn and then build in waves, swelling with emotion. It wasn't a melody anyone could mimic. It was too complex, too deep, too full of life and longing. It was a song that spoke of love lost and love found, of pain and joy tangled in the same breath. It was a song for Elias and only for him. He would close his eyes, letting the music wash over him, and in those moments, the loneliness that had defined so much of his life seemed to recede just a little. He had not known how badly he had craved this connection, understanding, even if it came from a tiny bird. He realized, slowly, that he wasn't the only one in the world who had known pain. Nor's song was a language they shared, a bond that needed no words. But even in this comfort, there was an unspoken fear in Elias's heart, a fear that the warmth he had come to feel was fragile, that one day the music would stop. The winter had been long, its grip tightening as the days grew shorter. The forest, once full of the vibrant symphony of birds, was now quiet except for the occasional rustle of snow-dusted branches. Elias's cabin, tucked beneath towering pines, had become a sanctuary, no longer just for him, but for the music Nor had brought back into his life. Yet, despite the warmth Nor had given him, a growing unease had settled deep in Elias's chest. His body was no longer as strong as it once had been. The coughing fits had come more frequently now, and the sharp pain in his chest was a constant reminder that time was moving far too quickly for him to hold on to it. Nor, too, had grown quieter in the last few days. Her once constant songs were now fewer, softer, as if she, too, sensed something was coming. Elias tried to brush it off, telling himself it was just the weight of the season. But deep down he knew. It was the cold that had begun to sink into his bones, a cold that not even the fire could chase away. His joints ached with the kind of weariness that sleep couldn't fix, and his breath had grown shallow, each inhale an effort. He would sit by the fire, the dim light flickering across his face, and feel a strange heaviness in his heart. That morning the air had a peculiar stillness, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elias woke with a weak, rasping cough, his body trembling with the effort. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew, this was not like the other times. This time something was different. Nor was perched on the windowsill, her feathers fluffed against the cold. She had been sitting there for hours, unmoving, her eyes locked on Elias. Her usual chirps and songs had gone silent, as though she too was waiting for something. Elias reached out a hand toward her, his fingers trembling. "Come here, Noor," he whispered. The bird fluttered onto his lap without hesitation, curling against him like she had so many times before. As he stroked her feathers, the weight of his own heartache felt unbearable. He had always feared this moment, the moment when the music would stop. But he hadn't been ready for the silence that followed. Noor's gaze never wavered. She tilted her head slightly as though trying to tell him something he wasn't yet ready to understand. Her little body trembled against his chest, but there was a quiet strength in her presence. Elias closed his eyes and rested his cheek against her warm feathers. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more," he whispered. And then with a quiet sigh he let go. It wasn't a dramatic thing, there were no last words, no struggle. Just a soft, final exhale as the light from the fire seemed to dim in the room. Noor didn't move for a long time. The silence stretched on, deep and unbroken as the snow continued to fall gently outside, covering the world in its blanket of white. The days after Elias's passing were as quiet as the snow that covered the forest floor. The villagers who had often visited the cabin to hear Noor's haunting songs found themselves drawn back, not by curiosity, but by an unspoken sense of loss. The path that wound up the hill, once tread by excited children and eager onlookers, now felt cold and abandoned. Noor too had changed. For 7 days she refused to leave the cabin. She perched by the hearth where Elias's chair sat, staring into the empty space where he had always been. She would sing no more, her voice silenced by grief, or perhaps by the weight of her loss. For those who ventured close enough, they could hear her faint rustling through the windows, but her song, that beautiful and sorrowful song, had fallen quiet. Then one morning as the sun broke through the clouds in soft rays, Noor was gone. She left no trace, no feather, no sign of where she had gone, but the villagers knew. The silence was complete. The songbird had flown, perhaps to join Elias, to find the man who had saved her from the cold and had shared in her loneliness. Some said they saw her high in the trees, her dark wings cutting through the sky like a shadow, but no one ever truly knew for certain. Years passed and Elias's cabin became a forgotten place. The stories of the songbird faded, replaced by new lives and new sounds, the whispers of time carrying away even the memories of Noor's songs. But in the quietest moments, when the wind would howl through the trees, there was something more than just the cold breath of winter. If you listened closely, you might catch a faint melody, soft and distant, floating between the trees. It was said that, sometimes when the snow was thick and the night was dark, a child walking through the woods might hear it. A single note, rising into the night, so fragile yet so pure, would echo softly against the moonlit snow. Some would stop in their tracks, feeling the tug in their hearts as if the song were not just from a bird, but from something else, something that lived in the very air, something from the past, wrapped in the warmth of love and loss. "Do you hear that?" the children would ask, eyes wide and filled with wonder. Their parents, who never quite understood, would smile and nod, though they could not explain it. "It's just the wind," they would say. "The forest has its own song." But the children would listen longer, their hearts swaying with the music, and in the stillness they might feel it. The bond between the bird and the man, the song that had been born from loss and love, still lingering in the pines. And perhaps, if they were quiet enough, they'd hear a faint echo, Noor's song rising through the trees, singing for him and for them, and for the world that had once been so full of silence, now filled with music.